This podcast contains explicit content and discussions related to real-life criminal activities, including violence and sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. The host's opinions are personal and are not representative of any individuals or organizations involved in the cases. We strive for accuracy, but if you've missed anything, please let us know. Thank you for listening. Welcome to Rotten Minds. I'm Kay.
And I'm V. Have you ever wondered what would cause an individual to murder his entire family and then go live another life? Well, in today's case, we are going to talk about a man who murdered his entire family and then evaded the authorities for 18 years. He is the so-called the Boogeyman of Westfield. The scary part of the story is that he would not have been caught if it hadn't been for one of his neighbors recognizing him from a TV show.
Before we get into the case, here's a disclaimer. This episode includes discussions of sensitive topics such as murder and violence, so please listen with caution.
On December 7, 1971, police arrived outside Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion at the request of neighbors who had grown concerned due to the lack of life inside the house. Though all the lights inside were on, it seemed like it was burning out one by one. The police knocked at the front door, but there was no answer. They slowly walked around the house and entered through an unlocked window. The first thing that they noticed was the house being unusually cold, and there were no signs of activity in the house. There was music playing throughout the house, which the authorities later described as a type of music usually played at funerals. As they walked around the house, they also noticed a faint smell of decomposing flesh, and as they walked further, they found the source of the smell.
In the ballroom of the mansion were 4 bodies, each lying on a blood-soaked sleeping bag, lined up neatly side by side. The victims were identified to be Helen List and her 3 children, Patricia, John Frederick, and Frederick. All of them had been shot to death at close range. There was also a trail of blood on the floor, which indicated that Helen and the children had been shot in the kitchen and then dragged to the ballroom. And upon further investigation, police found bags full of blood-soaked paper towels and a bloody mop, which meant that the killer had cleaned up after the murders.
As the police searched the house further, upstairs on the 3rd floor, they made another chilling discovery. On the floor was a 5th body, identified to be 84-year-old Alma List, who had also been shot in the head. Upon searching the house further, they came across 2 guns and a letter addressed to the pastor of the local church the List family attended. The letter was written by a John List, and it was basically a confession, at the same time an explanation for the man's morbid actions. To understand further, let us go back to where it all began.
John Emil List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan, to German-American parents, John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence List. Like his father, List was also a devout Lutheran and a Sunday school teacher. After graduating from Bay City Central High School in 1943, he enlisted in the United States Army and served as a laboratory technician during World War II. His father passed away in 1944. In 1946, List was discharged, after which he enrolled at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting, and was also commissioned as second lieutenant through ROTC. Now, if you don't know what ROTC is, ROTC stands for Reserve Officers Training Corps, which basically is a group of college and university-based officer training programs for training commissioned officers of the United States Armed Forces. In November 1950, as the Korean War escalated, List was recalled to active military service. It was then at Fort Eustis in Virginia he met Helen Morris Taylor, the widow of an infantry officer killed in action in Korea. She lived nearby with her daughter Brenda. John and Helen got married on December 1st, 1951 in Baltimore, Maryland, after which the family moved to Northern California. The Army, recognizing List's accounting skills, then reassigned him to the Finance Corps. After the completion of his second tour in 1952, he started working for an accounting firm in Detroit, after which he worked as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo. It was there that his 3 children were born. By 1959, List had been promoted to general supervisor of the company's accounting department. Helen was an alcoholic and had become increasingly unstable due to syphilis she had contracted from her first husband. Now, if you don't know what syphilis is, it is a sexually transmitted disease. She had not disclosed her condition to List before their marriage. In 1960, his stepdaughter Brenda got married and left the household, after which List moved with the remainder of his family to Rochester, New York, to take up a job with Xerox. There, he eventually became the director of accounting services. After working there for some time, he then accepted another job offer, this time as a vice president and comptroller at a bank in New Jersey City, and moved his family, including his mother, into Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion located at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey.
The morning of November 9th, 1971 began just like any other day. John had taken the children to school, while Helen and Alma remained at home. On the way back home from dropping off the children, John took 2 handguns from his car, one being his 9mm Steyr 1912 semi-automatic handgun, and the other one being his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver. He walked into the house and found his wife sitting at the table and eating her breakfast. He slowly crept up behind her and shot her once in the back of the head. She never saw it coming. After shooting her, List climbed the stairs and went upstairs to his mother, Alma's bedroom, and shot her above the left eye. And as soon as his 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, and 13-year-old son, Frederick, arrived home from school, List shot each of them in the back of the head. After committing such gruesome acts, he decided to make himself lunch and sat down in the kitchen, taking his time eating his lunch. Truly, how sick can this man be? As soon as he was done eating his lunch, he drove to the bank to close both his and his mother's bank accounts and drove himself to Westfield High School to watch his elder son, John Frederick, who was 15 at the time, play in a soccer game. It's just impossible to understand what was going through List's head as he watched his son play. Was he thinking about how he was going to kill him? After the game was over, List drove John Frederick back home. As soon as they were inside the house, List shot the child multiple times as misfire evidence showed that John Frederick had attempted to defend himself. It's just truly horrifying to think that John had known who his killer was at the very last moments of his life. What must have gone through his head when he saw his father standing there with a gun in his hand, we will never know. List then dragged the bodies of his wife and children to the ballroom of the mansion. Keep in mind that all of them had been killed in the kitchen, as evidence of blood trails showed that the bodies had been dragged to the ballroom from the kitchen. He placed the bodies each on sleeping bags, though he left his mother's body upstairs because, according to him, she had been too heavy for him to move, as understood from the letter he wrote to the church pastor. In the 5-page letter to his pastor, which was found on the desk in the study, he claimed that he saw too much evil in the world, and also as a result of financial difficulties, he had decided to kill his entire family. In the letter, he had explained that he couldn't keep his family and murder was the only solution for him. He had claimed that he had killed his family to supposedly save their souls.
Through the letter, the authorities understood that John had lost his job and was having money problems. Instead of letting his family know that he had lost his job, he decided to keep on pretending to go to work each morning. He would spend his days at the train station reading the newspaper and secretly skimming money from his mother's bank accounts to pay the mortgage. He refused to go on welfare because he felt that it would be an embarrassment in the community for the children, and also because he believed it would violate the principles of self-sufficiency that he had learned from his father. In the letter, it was also mentioned that he had other concerns as a devout Christian. List feared his family was turning away from a Christian life and would eventually stop going to church. His wife had already stopped going to church, and he feared that his children would follow in her footsteps. He disapproved of his daughter's passion in an acting career, a profession that, according to him, was immoral. In his mind, there was only one place he could send his family to save their souls. The letter also included some of the details of the murder, which basically explained how he had shot his family to death. It also describes the last moments he spent with his family, or in other words, their bodies. In the letter he wrote, "I said some prayers for them all from the hymn book, and that was the least I could do for them." He then proceeded to cancel all deliveries such as for milk and newspapers and contacted the children's schools to let their teachers know that they would be away visiting their ailing maternal grandmother. Keep in mind that Helen's mother was actually sick and had in fact cancelled coming down to Westfield. List had later said that if she had come, she would have been his sixth victim. Luckily, her life was spared because of the last-minute cancellation. He then took the time to clean the various crime scenes and then proceeded to cut out his picture from all the family photographs in the house. It's just truly sickening to think that after doing all of this, he decided to stay the night in the mansion and had the audacity to sleep in the same mansion where his family lay dead just a few rooms away. This man is a truly messed up individual. This also shows that he was trying to distance himself from the crime scene by cutting out his face from the family portraits. For a person who just killed his family, I don't think anything he does would be normal. The next morning, he turned on all the lights in the house and also turned on the radio and tuned it to a religious station, and then proceeded to walk out of the house and wouldn't be seen again for 18 long years. It is truly horrifying to comprehend the fact that the murders would not be discovered until December 7th, that is a month later. This was all due to List's carefully constructed plan. This guy took his sweet time in planning out the murder of his entire family and made it so that the bodies would not be discovered until much later. That is just so messed up. The bodies being found only a month later meant that the murderer had gotten a head start in his well-thought-out escape plan.
2 days after the bodies were found, the police found his car parked at JFK International Airport in New York City, but there was no trace of List. The date on the parking voucher was November the 10th, but there was no evidence that List had taken a flight. The nationwide manhunt for a mass murderer had begun, and the police issued a nationwide murder warrant for the arrest of John Emil List. He was wanted for the murder of his entire family. A ballistic report confirmed that the 2 guns found in John List's desk were the weapons used to kill his family. Autopsies revealed that the victims had been shot in the head, and the victims had been dead for about a month when they were discovered. No matter where police searched, everything was turning out to be a dead end. By then, the case had almost gone cold. Though a lot of effort was taken by the authorities to keep the case from going cold, it was all in vain. This would go on for 18 long, frustrating years.
Though the List family case had already gone cold early on, New Jersey authorities refused to give up on their hunt for justice. In 1989, they came up with an idea. The TV show America's Most Wanted has led to the capture of some of the FBI's most infamous fugitives by generating phone tips from viewers. If the authorities were successful in getting the List case aired, then someone would recognize the man and make that phone call, which was very needed because all other hope seemed lost. The detectives on the case convinced the host of the show to air the List case, despite the fact that the case was almost 2 decades old. But there was just one problem. In the show, at the end of each episode, viewers would be shown a photograph of the wanted person. But the most recent photograph of John was one taken years before the murders took place. It was difficult to understand what he would look like almost 20 years later. That was when the executive producer of the show mentioned a person called Frank Bender. Now, Frank Bender was a forensic sculptor and reconstruction artist, and he seemed like the right person for the job. He reconstructs face to help the police track down aging fugitives or identify decomposed bodies. It was part art, part science, and part intuition. When going from skull to face, Bender refers to special charts that measure the facial tissue thickness based on race, age, and gender. Using these measurement guidelines, Bender calculates the proper thickness of the skin in order to mold the shape of the face with his clay. Bender then makes a fiberglass bust from the mold. His extraordinary talent to put faces on the dead would now be applied to the living, an aging mass murderer. Then, Bender started his work, and the stage was now set to pump new life into an old murder case that had gone cold. He had to figure out how much List's face would have changed after 18 years.
To look at John List, Bender needed a psychological profile of the killer. With the help of a forensic psychologist, Richard Walter, both sculptor and psychologist together would predict how John List would age. Both of them pored over newspaper articles and photographs to analyze the man behind the murders. They researched his strict upbringing by his German parents. The Lutheran Church had been the main focus of young John's life. Plus, he was the only child and the son of an overly protective, domineering mother. He lacked social skills, and his neighbors described him as a reclusive man. He also had a long history of losing jobs. Thus, the psychological profile revealed a man who killed out of anger and retaliation because of his own failure. The profile helped reinforce Bender's vision of the aging fugitive. Bender sculpted List's mouth as going down on the corners because of the anxiety that he felt List carried with him from committing the crimes. The psychologist pointed out that it wasn't guilt from killing his family, but the anxiety of being caught. Bender also took into account genetics, and after looking at the photos of List's parents, he added sagging jowls, which basically means the flesh of the lower cheeks and the jaw. He also added a receding hairline to the bust. List had a surgical scar behind his right ear, and after proper research of how the scar would look after he aged, Bender added that also to the bust. With the fiberglass bust now being complete, Bender painted the skin and hair and put the bust in a suit and tie, what Bender and Walter thought List would wear most of the time. The final touch to the bust would be a pair of glasses. Walter knew for a fact that List wouldn't wear contacts, and Bender predicted List would be wearing a different style of glasses than those he wore at the age of 46. That is, when he committed the murders. Bender was sure that List would want to hide the fact that he was a failure by wearing glasses with dark, thick frames. Therefore, on went the glasses on the bust, and now the forensic bust was complete.
Isn't it very interesting how part art, part science was very, very instrumental in solving this case? It's really, really interesting. You wouldn't normally put the two together if you did not hear of such cases as this. Did you ever think of art and science being combined to do something such as this?
No, actually, I find this quite fascinating because I've not seen this before anywhere. And it's quite strange, but also fascinating in a sort of way.
And finally, on May 21st, 1989, America's Most Wanted aired the episode on the List murders. In Denver, Colorado, a family recognized the face of the mass murderer. They described him exactly looking like the bust and that he also worked as an accountant and went to a Lutheran church. As said by them, List dressed classy and had the same thick glasses on. Wow, that's just spot on modeling based on science and psychology.
Yeah, just by this we can understand how talented Bender was. That kind of showed how thorough and like very observant he was, I guess.
Yeah, not just observant, he was also studying the psychology of the criminal to the point that he kind of nailed it.
Yeah.
And on June 1st, less than 2 weeks after the broadcast, List was arrested at a Richmond accounting firm. List then continued to stand by his alias for several months, even after his 1989 extradition to Union County, New Jersey. And then when finally faced with irrefutable evidence, including a fingerprint match with List's military records, and as well as evidence found at the crime scene, he confessed his true identity on February 16, 1990. I mean, the man literally lived there. What did he expect, that he could get away with it? His fingerprints would be all over the place. In 1971, as the FBI later discovered, List had traveled by train from New Jersey first to Michigan and then to Colorado. He then settled in Denver in early 1972 and took an accounting job under the name Robert Peter Clark, or for short, Bob Clark. This was the name of one of his college classmates, although the real Bob Clark denied ever knowing the man. From 1979 to 1986, he was a comptroller at a paper box manufacturer outside Denver. He joined a Lutheran congregation and ran a carpool for church members without transport. He kills his entire family, then runs off like a coward, and then he wants to play the Good Samaritan. Then at one such religious gathering, he met an Army PX clerk named Dolores Miller, and they were married in 1985. In February 1988, the couple moved to a house in the Branham Mill neighborhood of Midlothian, Virginia, where List, still using the name Bob Clark, resumed work as an accountant at a small accounting firm, Medria, Joyner, Kirkham, and Woody. The sheer nerve that this man had to enjoy living life as a completely different person, just as though he had not murdered his actual family. He just tried to create a new family from the ground up, and they definitely had no idea what he had done to his previous family.
That just shows you how truly evil this man is.
And he's also like a very multi-faced personality. He shows different faces to different people. At church, he's so helpful and religious and, like very holy. And then he shows another face to his family, his new family. And there is always this past of him being a murderer that he's not disclosed to anyone at that point. I mean, in real life, I've seen some people like this. They're some of the worst people to exist, but they actually play double roles in their families and in their churches. They put on a completely different persona that the people in church see them as very godly, and it's almost like they act like they're not that disgusting person. Like it's a hidden personality in them. They hide it so well that they brainwash people into thinking, I can't say it's brainwash, they convince people to believe that they're so innocent and godly, where in fact they're just horrible people.
List had claimed because of his financial difficulties and his wife treating him poorly, he had committed such an atrocious act. He described her as an unkempt and paranoid recluse, after her struggle with alcoholism and syphilis had transformed her into a whole nother person, and she often humiliated him in public by comparing him with her first husband. He also claimed that Helen had trapped him in marriage by lying to him that she was pregnant. A court-appointed psychiatrist testified that List suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and that he saw only two solutions to his situation: either accept welfare or kill his family and send their souls to heaven. And obviously, he took the quote-unquote best option according to him. Seriously, this man was just really selfish. On April 12, 1990, List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, he denied direct responsibility for his actions, and he said, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." He's just basically washing his hands of the horrible act that he did and acting so innocent,
He is one of the people that believe that they could do anything and get forgiveness from God and just move on like nothing ever happened. he feels like he can pray away his sins, like killing his own family is, I don't know. It's just I just don't understand how there are people who believe that. I've come across some people like that as well. He's too in deep into this.
After all of this, if he thinks that prayer can still save him, he's definitely deluded. The judge was unpersuaded by List's words and said, John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave. He imposed a sentence of 5 terms of life imprisonment to be served consecutively, which was the maximum permissible penalty at the time. List filed an appeal of his convictions on grounds that his judgment had been impaired by post-traumatic stress disorder due to his military service. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that he's really playing the military PTSD card right now, you know. He also argued that the letter he left behind at the crime scene, essentially his confession, was a confidential communication to his pastor and therefore inadmissible as evidence. A federal appeals court rejected both arguments. List eventually expressed a degree of remorse for his crimes. I wish I had never done what I did, he told Connie Chung in 2002. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since. When asked why he had not taken his own life, he said he believed that suicide would have prevented him from going to heaven, where he hoped to be reunited with his family. The irony, he thinks that after murdering his family, that he would get a free pass into the gates of heaven.
He doesn't consider killing his family as a sin because he thinks that if he did commit suicide, which is according to him a sin, he would not be granted entry into heaven.
You know what I find ironic is the fact that he was such a devotee and he wanted to prevent his family from sin. And so he decided to kill them all, but what he apparently didn't realize was that murdering is like the biggest sin of them all.
Right. I mean, this is unfortunately very common. There's a lot of people, even in present time, even maybe around you and me, and we would never know that they actually think this way. And on March 21st, 2008, while imprisoned at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey, List died of complications from pneumonia, aged 82. It's totally unfair that he got to live till the end of his life while he cut short his children's lives just because of his selfishness. In reporting his death, the New Jersey Star-Ledger referred to him as the boogeyman of Westfield, and that is how he got his name. And that is how science and art helped in catching a man who annihilated his entire family and evaded the police for 18 long years. The thing was that psychologists described this man as being perfectly right in his mind when he shot his family to death in cold blood. He just committed the most horrible thing that a father, husband, son, or even a human could ever do. And all for what? For his own damn selfish needs. And that brings us to the end of today's case. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you have any case suggestions, let us know in the comments or in the Q&A area in Spotify. I'm Kay.
And I'm V.
And this was Rotten Minds.